Something I've noticed just in life is that a lot of people deal with social anxiety. And among people who see themselves as highly sensitive, this is very common. I've had some of this in my life, and for me, how to make sense of it and how to deal with it effectively have laid largely outside of what I'd been taught and what I'd found in the culture. And so for that reason, I wanted to make a video on this and share what I'd learned. Just a quick disclaimer here, this video is for educational purposes only. It is not professional advice of any kind. It is certainly not mental health advice, and I am not a mental health professional. First of all, let me lay the foundation here by talking about this issue of high sensitivity, because I think it's really important and really interesting. I have personally never found some of these more supposedly scientifically valid constructs like highly sensitive person or neurodivergence to be all that helpful. I've always preferred to look at it more just in terms of sensitivity, right? Having greater sensitivity, which is more kind of grounded to everyday experience, more general and less clinical. The general dynamic here is that people that are very sensitive tend to be our artists, our healers, our spiritual leaders, people that kind of lead society in new ways, people like Thoreau or Robin Williams, and really our greatest luminaries, I would say. And so that heightened sensitivity is what is needed for all of that extra awareness and insight, but it also means that we are feeling more pain. And so for that reason, we're kind of like canaries in the coal mine for cultures that are dysfunctional or authoritarian, or where there's some kind of like a tribal wound, you could say. And I really like to emphasize this way of looking at the sensitivity phenomenon because these people do, and I think have always played a very important and distinct role in the culture. But I would say, especially today, it's very much marginalized and suppressed for a variety of reasons. Now, when it comes to social anxiety, what happened for me was when I was a kid, and in particular when I was a teenager, I was said to have had a problem with social anxiety and sometimes lacked social skills. But at the same time, many people said that I had special abilities in this area. So I was said to be extremely charismatic, extremely funny, really gifted at connecting with people. And so for me, I was like, well, do I have deficits in this area or do I have special abilities? But now, looking back on it, it's clear that what was happening was this. Sometimes my interactions with people weren't great, but it would vary depending on the situation and depending on the people. So I might have a lot of anxiety, for example, around people that it's clear now were particularly unresolved and wounded in terms of their energy and their behavior, which I could feel. And often this really can be most of the people around us. People who have a lot of emotional and psychic pain that they've just buried and jammed down. And so they might have a very inauthentic facade. Maybe they're very judgmental. Maybe they're controlling. In other words, if you're more sensitive, you are just picking up on all these things from the people around you. You're picking up on their kind of underlying emotional and psychological pain that they haven't dealt with, and you're seeing how that is showing up in terms of their energy and their behavior. And as a particularly sensitive person, you don't need a psychology degree to see this. You don't need a social work license. You don't need special training. You just are seeing it and feeling it. Even if you don't have words for it yet, and even if you're not trusting your perception yet because nobody's validated it. So when this is what social anxiety is based around, maybe it's not even accurate to call it social anxiety. Maybe it's just fear. Rational fear. Fear because the people around you are not totally safe. They're not totally safe because think about what safe people are. Safe people ultimately are those that are able to be present and aware with basically everything that is coming up inside of them. And they have a way of integrating it and making sense of it so that it doesn't become somebody else's problem. And being really, really good at that is not the norm in our culture at all. And people that aren't really doing that aren't really all that safe. Maybe they're not acutely dangerous. Maybe we don't need to like fully remove ourselves, but they're unsafe enough that it would make perfect sense that a more sensitive child would feel some degree of fear around them. And it might seem like we have a problem with social anxiety because we're experiencing this all the time, but it really could just kind of come down to the evolution or lack thereof of consciousness, right? Of the fact that, like, again, being really, really good at awareness is really not the norm. And often as sensitive children, we don't really have anybody validating this for us. Often they're just kind of like, what are you talking about? You're the problem. Even if they're well-meaning on some level, this could really be their attitude because that's just what they know, right? Like their level of awareness or unawareness is just their reality. And I would say another thing that can be a part of why we might get regarded as having poor social skills is because people can get offended by us because we are feeling and then pointing out the truth in them, their own unresolved stuff. And so they find it threatening because things are being surfaced in them that they don't want to or don't know how to deal with. And early on in our journey, we may not even know that this is what's really going on because we haven't been supported in connecting deeply with ourselves and with what we know. Now, in my experience, when we look at it like it's this discrete clinical issue like social anxiety, which in my experience is overwhelmingly how the mental health field treats it, then it basically closes us off from the possibility of actually dealing with it and resolving it because we're not actually dealing with the truth of it. And this is just an important thing to point out here, which is that this, at least it's been my experience and my observation, that it absolutely can be resolved and can be dealt with. It's not just like something that, arises from our nature and we're just stuck with for the rest of our lives and we just kind of have to suffer through it like it's our cross to bear. No, actually, it's something that you can heal very deeply to the point where now I would say I probably have significantly less social anxiety than your average non-highly sensitive person, but I also have all the benefits of being highly sensitive, like, a great ability to see others, to connect with others. And this was because I got really dedicated about being present with everything that was coming up inside of me and really like bringing this more truthful awareness to it. And over time, I was really able to kind of heal and transform any of that social anxiety that I had. But it can be really easy as more sensitive people to think that like this is just kind of a life sentence that we just have to suffer feeling really terrible around people all the time. And I think, I don't want to tell anybody else what's going on for them, but I think as a general comment, a lot of this really does come down to a very clinical, individualizing way of looking at these things, which is reinforced by the mental health system and society. Because again, we're not actually dealing with the truth of it. We just think that this is some mental health problem within us rather than something that relates to the way the world is, a particular aspect of our nature, and then how that has shaped us over time. And if I hadn't figured this out, and if I just kind of bought what I'd been told about these issues, then I would likely just be dealing with the same pains year after year, maybe for an entire lifetime, rather than this is something that can be resolved and there can be a lot of well-being on the other side of it. Now, social anxiety is often something that many kids receive support for. And often it's these more sensitive kids that are the ones that are like being said to have all these different issues like ADHD or social anxiety or issues with school or like issues with authority, or behavior problems or that kind of thing. And I would say that what this is really about for the most part, in my opinion, is that these more sensitive kids are feeling what is going on. They're feeling what's wrong in the environment. And so the environment just pathologizes them. It basically scapegoats them. And so I remember going through so-called mental health treatment as a teenager, and the clinicians really saw things in this way. They really like bought into their constructs, and they bought into their little boxes. And they would get us to like view ourselves in this way. So it's like, I remember in certain groups and things, we would be like introducing ourselves in this way. We'd be like, oh, my name is such and such, and I'm here to deal with social anxiety, substance abuse, and like school issues or whatever. And now looking back on it, it just seems so crazy that we were being shaped this way, and we were having these very false ways of looking at ourselves and looking at these issues really forced on us. And looking back on it, it's really clear to me now that those clinicians and what seems like that entire industry had really no ability to understand the truth of what was going on. They were really just manipulating these kids to fit better into that environment, and then really believing that by doing that, they're supporting them. But they didn't understand like the deeper dynamics driving it. They didn't understand, for example, that, more sensitive kids are going to be like feeling more of what's going on around them, and that this is a really powerful and really positive thing that might be causing what society is calling social anxiety. And my general sense as to why the mental health field, particularly with children, but not just with children, tends to make these issues about these kind of clinical constructs and doesn't understand, or sometimes just outright denies, these deeper issues, is because these deeper issues, and therefore the source of our healing, is basically subversive on some level. And the mental health field is distinctly anti-subversive. Not explicitly so, but I think that this is really something that you can feel and you can see. The psychologist Bruce Levine has referred to the mental health field as a kind of interpersonal police force, which I think is really accurate and really captures this. Because we're pointing out things that are buried and that are difficult to deal with, and if dealt with, would significantly change the status quo. And I think that this just makes them very uncomfortable. It's particularly when they're working with kids, it's not what they're being hired to do. They're being hired to basically program the kids to fit in their environment so that they're more convenient. And so it's just much easier for them to basically deny this and kind of like shape them so that they fit into their environment. And so it's just easier for them to be like, you have these clinical issues, they reside in you, they don't really have to do with your environment. We'll pay lip service to that a little bit, but at the end of the day, we're going to make it about these clinical issues that you have, and then, support you in them. And so it appeared to me that these mental health professionals who work with children clearly cared much more about maintaining the status quo and getting you to conform and not speak the truth, and basically getting you to dissociate, than they do about genuine well-being, about saving lives, about improving the human condition. And I think for a lot of us, the resolution to these deeper issues, like social anxiety in this case, lies in a kind of deeper awareness that is not part of the status quo. And as highly sensitive people, we probably have a lot of access to that, because we can't just ignore it so easily. We can't just dissociate so easily like everybody else. So this is my quick take here on highly sensitive people and social anxiety. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching this all the way to the end. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Please share this video with anybody who you think might find it helpful. Thank you again, and I look forward to having you next time.